To master traditional grip, it helps to understand a little bit about where it came from and why it actually evolved. If you went back many years to when people wore drums on slings, probably back in the armies and in wars, the drum itself, because of the way that it would be held around a sling like this, would actually be tilted. So, and as you move, the drum would kind of move. Well, if you imagine that this was my drum on a sling, if I put this underneath this pad so that it's on an angle, my drum would actually have been up at an angle like this. So if we had everybody playing match grip, then what you're going to find is that one of the arms has to be up in the air like this. Now that there is going to ache quite quickly. Now if I'm marching for hours and hours, that's really going to be quite painful. And so what people figured out was, hold on a minute, my right hand's fine there, but what if I just put my left hand underneath instead? All of a sudden then it was like, oh, that's better, this is relaxing. And so over the years then, that basic way of just holding the stick like this slowly developed into the traditional grip that we know today. Now, what's eventually happened is people have developed harnesses rather than slings that have meant that drums now are perfectly flat. Now, for me personally, I prefer the drums being flat. It's easier to be able to make everyone look the same. Some drum lines still like the tradition. You can make current harnesses look and have your drum on the angle, but I would say the majority of people now certainly go for a flat drum. Now, that, ironically, match grip is actually better for that, but this looks a lot cooler, doesn't it? And that's probably the main reason and tradition why people use the traditional grip. So to learn the traditional grip, we've got the same variables that we learned when we did our right hand. So to very quickly go back to the right hand, we've got our fingers, our 3 fingers here that pump the stick. We've got the wrist motion that helps move the stick. We can use a bit of arm as well. And between those 3 variables, we get our motion. Now, obviously, with this hand, our fulcrum, our pivot point, is the thumb and the first finger. So keep those in mind when we learn the left hand. If we put our left hand down out in front of us like this, like we're chopping a piece of wood, if we just turn our thumb over, then we get this rotation in our hand. Well, that's the rotation that we need. Now, what we actually want to be able to do is to put our thumb all the way back and then all the way to the other side. So the first thing you want to do is just sit and practice just doing this. Don't worry if you get a little bit of motion back here, that's fine. But the main thing is trying to get our hand used to this motion. Now, what we're going to do then is we're going to keep it straight up in the air like this, and I'm going to place a stick in this gap here. Now, my thumb is going to have to press downwards a little. I don't want a lot of tension, but enough tension to hold that stick in place. Now, the stick's going to want to fall like this, so you've got to develop the muscles to be able to hold it up like this. If you get a little bit of a droop, that's fine. When you start to go down here, that's a problem. So first of all, see if you can get used to putting that stick in here. Positionally wise, we don't want to be in the middle. We want to be the same sort of spot you would hold it with your right hand. On Vic First sticks, it's around the F, I and the R. Some people like it a little bit further back, maybe where the American flag is. But you can see that if you divide this into 3 parts, I'm certainly towards the final third here. Now, what we're going to do now is we're just going to do the same as we just did. We're going to pull our thumb back and then back down. And then what we're going to do eventually is we're actually going to strike the drum or the pad. Now, eventually, you'll be able to move that up and down like that. So at the moment, this is the equivalent, this at the moment is the equivalent of my wrist doing this, my right hand. So this whole thing is my left hand wrist. Well, what about these fingers then? Well, these fingers get used in a complete different way. These fingers here on my right hand actually are replicated by the thumb. So the thumb, even if I don't use my arm at the moment, my thumb can actually move up and down to move that stick. So I want you to think of that as your finger motion. What will happen eventually is we'll use a bit of wrist and a bit of fingers, and we'll do the same with this hand. So a bit of wrist, a bit of fingers, so in other words, a bit of rotation, a bit of the thumb, and that's going to give us the full motion here. Now, you don't see many drum lines playing with their fingers off the stick like this. So we're going to now put these around the stick. We're going to split these like this. We've got the bottom 2 fingers and the top 2 fingers. So the top 2 go over the stick and the bottom 2 go underneath the stick. What happens is our ring finger, this guy here, the cuticle, which is where the nail meets the skin of your hand, is where the stick's going to rest, right on top of there. Now you might have to develop a bit of a callus here, you might find your nail will go a bit nasty for a while, and it's going to rest right on top of there, right before that first knuckle. And so that means then that at the top, my thumb is going to sit on top of that first finger, and we start to make kind of an OK sign, or like a set of eyeglasses for a little kid. So we're doing that kind of motion. So from the top here, you can see that I'm in this position. So 2 on top, 2 underneath. This little guy is basically supporting that bottom finger. So I'm going to get this motion here. Again, so you understand what we've got here, right? We've got the thumb in slight contact with that first finger, so they can work together now. I've got my middle finger helping out with that. I don't tend to use that to actually gain any momentum in the stick. Some people may, but I certainly sit in next to that first thumb and that first finger to give me that. Then the stick is supported by my ring finger, the cuticle, and my little finger basically supports that ring finger to give it a little bit of scaffolding to hold that up. Now, one of the first problems you're going to find when you play this technique is that if we go back to where we started in this position here, if I change that angle like this and I try and turn, I can't turn anymore. So I've got to have that angle, this angle here happening. So when I put my fingers around the stick, that angle needs to stay. And the way that I know whether I'm doing that or not is if I was to take a squash ball or a golf ball, could I place it into this gap here? I want that gap to stay. So I don't want it to disappear like this. So when I'm playing here, this is it with room to put a golf ball in there. In fact, by luck, I've got a bass drum here that looks a bit like a golf ball. So if you imagine putting that in there, that can fit in that gap there while I'm playing, which allows me to turn all the way back up here. If I now squash that golf ball, so I change the angle, then now I've still got traditional technique, but I can't turn because my arm physically can't turn any more than that. So open those fingers out, and that's what's going to give you the leverage to get that turn. So to make sure that everyone's with me at the moment, right? We've got rotation, we've got the thumb and actually the first finger working together to press the stick down. I could just practice them with no rotation, that they can kind of move the stick, but with rotation, it's a lot easier. My middle finger helps that same motion and steadies the stick, stop it moving forward and backwards. This little guy here, my ring finger, when he's pushing the stick from underneath, he can push the stick upwards or he can support it. So these two fingers here are kind of holding the stick. Now I'm not squeezing, I haven't got the strength there to hold the stick, but I'm trying my best not to really leave the stick very often. If I do leave the stick, you'll sometimes see people playing doubles and doing this kind of thing. All we've got to think about is that's fine if all 10 of my guys are doing that, because then everyone looks the same. What you're going to find most of the time, people try to stay on the stick at least 90% of the time. I would say that my cuticle leaves the stick a tiny amount, but maximum of about half a centimetre. That's only when I'm doing things like doubles. If I'm playing straight notes, it tends to be on the stick. And my little finger here, the little pinky, he's support for that ring finger. Now what we're after with this technique is we're after this from the front. If you look at my sticks there, that angle there wants to be the same. So we don't really want my left up like this, and we don't really want my right this. We want them to be exactly the same. So from the front, when you're looking in front of your mirror, have a look at that. Some people will say, well, we need to fit 2 fingers underneath the back of your stick and the rim. Some other guys might say, well, I want my drum line to be like this. There's nothing wrong if everybody looks like this, or loose even at that motion, or anyone looks like this, as long as we're all the same. I would say that the sort of most common is where I am there. It's about 2 fingers worth under each stick. I'm going for a triangle, which is not quite a perfect 90 degrees because that pushes my arms out and gets me a bit of tension up here. So if I put my arms on my side and just bring them up, so there's no tension here or here, then the triangle that I'm going to make, the angle is about that there. And all I'm going to try and do then is play a bunch of one and a bunch of the other hand. What I might get you to do is to hold your sticks up in the air so that you get used to this idea of hitting a drum and bouncing back. So you might go maybe 8 with this hand, and then 8 with this hand, and That's just to teach you that the stick's got a rebound. We don't want to stop the stick and then lift it. But obviously in drum corps, we've got a set position, and we're going to try stay in that position. Now, something that a lot of people don't talk about is what's going on with our upper body. If you're learning this standing up and you've got a nice big posture, like dominant posture like this, where my shoulders are back and my head's kind of up, I'm looking up, you've got a much better chance of learning this technique correctly than if you sat down and you're in this kind of position to channel in. So make sure that the posture up here is quite important. I want my shoulders, I don't want to pull all the way back there because that creates tension, but I want them up in a position a little bit like this. You're sometimes going to see people moving their arm here, right? So as well as the stuff I've just told you, we've got two other points at which we could pivot. We could pivot here, so I can do this with my arm, which you might see me doing if I'm doing things like speedo technique. But I've also got this, which I could do with my arm if I'm doing some more advanced techniques like Moella. And I've also got the shoulder, so I can get big motions. Now, all of these little these things I'm talking about here are much less important when you're learning basic technique than just the ones I've mentioned to start with. But what I'm getting at is if you get a bit of movement here, don't stress too much. That's absolutely fine. What we don't want is that. What you're going to find when you're learning these techniques is it takes hours, days, months, years to get perfect technique. I don't consider myself as having perfect technique, and I've been playing for like 20 years. So I'm always trying new things out and finding new techniques and methods. You'll see people saying, oh, practice like this. And then I'll practice that for a week, and it'll be like, well, that's got me a 1% better. And then someone will say, practice just with your first finger or just your second finger. There's a million different things you're going to find out there, but you're all going to add up together to eventually give you that technique that you know you can rely and trust on. So that's our traditional technique. Go and practice it. I'll see you next time.